the public's not going to be able to speak. They're going to just ask questions in the Q&A.
Yeah, I think with the number of people that we have in attendance, it's going to be easiest that way.
Okay, I mean, I was under the impression we were going to hear from the public. But okay, it's your show.
Yeah, I mean, so they can raise questions or comments in the Q&A. Okay, well, thank you everyone for joining us this evening. I hope everyone's doing well, enjoying this nice spring evening. We wanted to call us together to provide an update and get feedback about the former Stone property, the property that for many, many decades was home of Stone Industrial, which is now currently vacant and is up for sale. As many of you know, you were probably here in attendance last fall when we had a meeting to talk about the one proposal for that site to relocate ProFish in that location. That proposal appears to not be in existence anymore. The developers, the owners of the ProFish plant, made an offer to the owners of the property that was not accepted. That was now several months ago, and ProFish has not come back with another offer. So what the options that appear to be before us, which we'll be talking about in more detail tonight, the current zoning of the property is heavy industrial, which is what it's been for many years. But the prospective uses for a heavy industrial site are not could be much more intense than the use that it has been in the past. The other potential use for the site, and one that was part of a sector plan for the area back in around 2000, was proposed for a long-term transition to residential development. But many have raised concerns about the potential impacts of a residential development, that could bring additional traffic to the area, and there's a lot of questions and concerns about the density of residential development that could occur there. So we wanted to bring folks together tonight to hear about what the prospects are. In the last few days, we've heard from Finmark, who's a current owner of the property, that they actually are entertaining currently in negotiations, in fact, about some potential industrial users of the site, and that might be those might be a reality before we have a chance to even pursue alternative development at the location, pursue a rezoning to residential. But we did want to go out to the community and discuss with you about what the alternatives might be. Make sure that the residents who will be impacted by this development understand the prospective impacts that this could have to your property, and have the opportunity to ask questions about it. So we have joining with us County Councilmember Tom Bernoga, of course, who's the city doesn't have zoning authority over the property, the county does. So we wanted to make sure that he was part of this conversation as well. And I appreciate that we are joined also by several of my colleagues on the College Park City Council. I see Council Members Mitchell and Mackey from District 4. I think I saw Council Members, I see Council Member Kabir from District 1 in the audience. I also see Councilmember Essers from District 2. I think Councilmember Dennis from District 2 was on as well. And I apologize as I scan through if I'm missing anybody. But we're also joined with a traffic consultant who can answer questions about the potential traffic impacts of the various proposals. And we're joined with representatives from the Maryland National Capital Park and Planning Commission, who can also answer questions. So with that, I'll turn it over to my county council member, the county council member that represents this part of Prince George's County, where the Stone Industrial Site is located. Tom Dronoga.
Thank you. I'll be very brief. I just want to thank the city for putting together another conversation around the Stone property. And I'm very interested in hearing what the residents of North College Park think about the various options that may come up in the future. So thank you. I'll be very curious.
Okay, and with that, why don't we turn it over to our City Director of Planning, Terry Shum, who will start us off by introducing us to the, and actually, Terry, would you mind just going over who all the players are with us? I wasn't quite sure of everybody's role exactly, so maybe you can cover that in a little bit more depth before you start talking about the.
Sure. So we have from the City of College Park planning staff, Katie Hart, who is our community development planner, and she's manning the Q&A function tonight. So we'll be receiving and reading out loud the questions that we get. And then we have with us from the Maryland National Capital Park and Planning Commission, Chad Williams, and many of you know Chad from his work on the zoning rewrite, and he is a master planner with Park and Planning. And we also have Scott Rowe, and he is the supervisor of land use planning. I may have gotten that wrong, Scott, but when you get up, you can correct me if I did. Supervisor long range planning at Park and Planning. And from the Kittleson and Associates, we have Aditya Inamdar and Amelia Martin, and they will be talking tonight about the traffic and access impacts that are associated with this site. So, and we thank all of them for being with us and sharing their time and expertise tonight. So I'm going to get us started, although I think the mayor already did. The mayor gave a great overview of the background and the status of the property, but we're going to dig a little bit deeper in this presentation tonight to make sure everyone in attendance is familiar with the property. I know residents of North College Park are very familiar with it, but other residents may not be so much. So I'm going to spend a few minutes in the next couple of slides just getting you acquainted with the site. So on the screen now is just the relative location of the Stone property in the city and the surrounding environment. So you can see it really is pretty much central in the city of College Park, south of the Capitol Beltway, north of Maryland 193, east of Baltimore Avenue, and then it lies right on the railroad tracks on the rail line. And of course, that's the Metro Green Line that runs through here. Now, this site is where we get a little closer look at what's going on here. This shows the actual property boundaries of the Stone property. And you can see that there is frontage. The frontage of the property lies along 51st Avenue, which is this north-south street here. The city's Public Works Department is immediately to the north. The residential neighborhoods of North College Park are on the west, and to the south is really an active industrial area that's known as the Branchville Industrial Park. On this slide, you see the actual property plat that's recorded in the land records. This is known as Parcel 2. It contains about 17 acres. And you can see it has a very, sawtooth boundary on the western side, and overall just a very irregular shape. On this slide, you see the building footprints on the site. So the property is outlined in blue, and then there are 3 existing one-story buildings on the site. They're all now vacant. They comprise about 113,000 square feet, and they previously were used for manufacturing by the Stone Straw Company. At least the two larger buildings, here and here, and then the smaller building was used as an office space. Here is the zoning map of the property, and I apologize for the sort of the red lines got a little out of control here, trying to show the boundary of the property. Again, especially the western edge being very, very irregular. But you can see, even so, that the property is in two different zoning classifications. The majority of the site is zoned I2, which is heavy industrial, and that's shown in gray. The western edge of the property that fronts on 51st Avenue is zoned for R55, single family detached residential, and that's shown in yellow. And at the top of the slide, you'll see a green shade, and also on the west to the north is the Board of Education property, which is zoned open space. And then to the west, you see Duval Field, which is also zoned open space and is the city's premier park property. On the east side of the track, you see it's all purple, and that is the city of Greenbelt. Most of the south core is what it's called, has been redeveloped with a mix of uses. And this is zoned for MXT, which is mixed use transportation, due to its proximity to the Greenbelt Metro Station. And this slide, I think, is probably the best place to see the site access to the Stone property. This is Cree Lane, and this little gray finger here is the driveway and the sole access into the Stone property. On the south side, this is Branchville Road, and you see 51st Place extends a little bit into the industrial area, but does not extend to the site boundary of Stone. So unfortunately, this access is not available to the Stone property at this time. This access up on the north is the only access available. This is a land use map of the property. So this is different from the zoning map because it reflects how the property is actually being used or how it's been developed. So you see a lot of colors on here because there's a lot of different uses that are going on here. You'll see that the Stone property is entirely in industrial use, but there are a few industrial properties towards the south in the industrial park that are actually used as retail. And the blue to the north and to the west, again, you'll recognize the Board of Education property. This is the city's Department of Public Works. This is Duval Field. The Board of Public Works property in Duval Field were green in the last slide, but they're considered in the land use category to be institutional uses and are shown in blue. And then if you skip to the east side of the tracks, the developed portion of the south core, you've got orange representing apartment uses and brown representing townhouse development. So now we take a closer look at the site again and some of the potential site constraints in regard to redevelopment of the property. So only about 1/2 of the site is currently developed, and only about 10 of the 17 acres total is estimated to be developable given these site constraints. So what you see on the western side of the property is existing woodlands. There are about 6.5 acres of woodlands on this west side. And in any redevelopment, a minimum of about 1 3/4 acres or 10% of the site would need to remain and could not be developed. And this is per the county's Woodland and Wildlife Conservation Ordinance. There are also on the western edge of the site potential wetlands. There could be up to 1.2 acres of wetlands here, which likely could not be redeveloped in any scenario. There's also some sloping topography throughout the site. That's not a very large constraint, however, in redevelopment. So many of you know that there was some environmental contamination on the site from the previous manufacturing use. This has been addressed by the current property owner under the supervision of the Maryland Department of the Environment's voluntary cleanup program. So I think the site stands ready to be developed at this time or transition to another use. So that's all I had to say in terms of orienting you to the site. What I'd like to do now is turn to both Chad and Scott, who are going to dig a little deeper into the zoning issues, the zoning history, the master plan history of the site, and then I think have a really important conversation about what uses are currently permitted to be on the site. And under the zoning, the new zoning ordinance, which hopefully will be implemented within the year, how does that change things? What uses will be permitted then? So I will stop sharing and turn it over to, I think, Scott, you were gonna go first.
Yeah, thanks, Terry, and good evening, everyone. My name is Scott Rowe. I'm the supervisor of the Long Range Planning Section for the Prince George's County Planning Department. This property is subject to the 2001 approved sector plan for the Greenbelt metro area. And in this sector plan, the recommendation was that over the long term, which generally in a sector plan would be about 25 years, the property in question should transition from industrial uses to what the plan calls medium suburban density, which is approximately 4.2 dwelling units per acre, which is similar to the surrounding neighborhood, which is 4 to 6 dwelling units per acre, depending on where you are. I'm going to share my screen for a second just to share the plan from that era. And so this is the southern half of the future land use plan, and it's important to note that only the part of the part of this that's west of the railroad tracks is still subject to this plan. The area North College Park here, the Greenbelt area and around the metro has a newer sector plan. So the plan recommended the long-term transitioning of the Branchville Industrial Park from industrial to residential. However, for some reason, the sectional map amendment that went along with the plan retained the properties in the zones they're in today, the I-2 zone, some of the commercial zoning down to the southern part. So that's the situation we find ourselves in today from a planning and zoning standpoint. It happens from time to time, not all the time, but sometimes we'll have a master plan that conflicts with the zoning, and that always presents some complications when it comes to developing the property. Chad, do you want to add on to that or step in and discuss the zoning a little bit?
Sure. Thank you, Scott. And Terry, if you don't mind sharing the screen and going back to the zoning map, that might be the best one for me to talk from. So
Sure.
while you're doing that, good evening, everybody. My name is Chad Williams. I see a lot of familiar names in the attendees, so I think most of you know me. I spent about 10 years as the planning department's area planner for College Park, including time as project manager of the Central US 1 Corridor Sector Plan. And I'm the project manager now of the county zoning ordinance rewrite, which the council adopted on October 23rd, 2018. So I'm going to talk a little bit about both the current I2 zone and the new IH, or industrial heavy zone. And I'm going to do it from the lens of kind of three fundamental building blocks of any zoning and concept as a whole. And that is the purposes of the zone, the uses the zone allows, and any standards that are requirements of that zone. So when you look at the current I2 heavy industrial and the proposed IH industrial heavy zones, they're really very similar in fundamental ways. The purpose statements from the current zoning ordinance have been carried forward, and those pertain to accommodating intense industrial uses within larger tracts of land, industrial uses which may be impactful on adjoining properties but are necessary for the county's economic well-being. And that's an important aspect for the I2 zone, because our Plan 2035 general plan does recommend supporting and retaining all of the industrial zoning in the county for economic tax-based purposes. So that's just important to note as I go through. And then the third purpose of the current zoning ordinance is to apply site development standards, which will generate attractive, conventional, heavy industrial environment. The proposed replacement zone, the industrial heavy zone, is, again, it has those same three purpose statements, but it also adds a few purposes. Accommodating limited residential uses, particularly for adaptive reuse opportunities. And what we had in mind with that, and what the council had in mind, are kind of industrial lofts at up to 12 dwelling units per acre. So that's kind of the concept that this zone is looking for. That ties into the next purpose, which is encourage the reuse of existing industrial development. That's obviously the purpose of this meeting tonight, is to talk about reuse opportunities. And then the last purpose is a new one, mitigate potential impacts to surrounding residential neighborhoods. And this provides a linkage between the purposes of the industrial heavy zone and things like neighborhood compatibility standards and industrial form and design standards, which are new to the new zoning ordinance. In terms of their uses, as you might expect in an industrial heavy zone, there's a lot of emphasis on manufacturing uses that are permitted by right. There are some kind of undesirable heavy uses that are allowed in the industrial zones, the heavy industrial, concrete recycling, for example, sand and gravel wet processing, these are permitted, surface mining with the approval as a special exception. But it's not just manufacturing, it's also limited retail and services, think of banks, medical offices, dry cleaning. Food and beverage is allowed in this area, food or beverage sales or stores. Those are just like corner grocery stores or larger scale grocery stores. They do require a detailed site plan review, but they are permitted in this zone. Various eating and drinking establishments are permitted, especially those with drive-through or without drive-through. The new zoning ordinance makes a little bit of a distinction with those. There's a few things to clear up in some legislation that'll be forthcoming with the new ordinance, but what the new ordinance would permit is eating or drinking without drive-through very clearly. And I believe the intent that we hope the council will look to clarify is dealing with eating and drinking with drive-throughs. So stay tuned on that. Speaking of drive-throughs and auto-related uses, things like car washes, auto sales lots, towing lots, repair yards, gas stations with a detailed site plan, those are also permitted. Adult and child daycare, place of worship, private schools, various recreational uses, a broad array of recreational uses are permitted. And when it comes to residential, really the only residential permitted in today's I2 zone is up to 3 dwelling units per building if that building also contains commercial or industrial uses. So that's kind of a little known feature of the industrial zone. It does permit some residential, but under very limited circumstances. The new IH zone has all those uses with that caveat on eating and drinking I mentioned earlier, with the addition of artist residential studios, dwelling, live, work, and multifamily. Those 3 residential types are permitted in the zone by the granting of a special exception. So those would require a public hearing with a recommendation, perhaps a decision of the zoning hearing examiner, with the ultimate decision in the hands of the council. And again, the dwelling unit density will be capped at 12 dwelling units per acre. The yellow you see on this map is the R55 residential 55 single family detached zone. That's about 6.5 dwelling units per acre maximum, just to give you some idea. In terms of more of the group living arrangements, the only group living that's permitted in the IH zone is a planned retirement community, also with the approval of a special exception, and a convent or monastery, should there be interest in that, that's actually permitted by right in this zone. There's a little bit of a change to the food or beverage. I mentioned earlier that that required a detailed site plan. Food or beverage has been kind of turned into a different type of use, a different name of use, which is more generalized, kind of grocery store or food market, I believe is how it's listed in a new ordinance. That's generally permitted. There's been more of an emphasis in a new ordinance overall on food production and drink production, including small scale alcohol production that is also permitted in this zone. Convenience stores are permitted, and with that emphasis on food, we're looking at also fresh foods, so farmers markets are permitted, as is urban agriculture and community gardens. In terms of the zoning of the community, the proposed zoning map looks almost the same as what you see on your screen now. All the colors are the same with one exception. All the uses are generally the same. Your residential neighborhood, the yellow, the R55, the same density. It's a residential focus zone. The green is intended for recreational, but also now rural and agricultural purposes. And both the reserved open space and the open space zones are categorized with their replacements in the new ordinance as rural and agricultural as a classification. The red is today our shopping center zone, and it's our general commercial and office zone in the future. The exception on this map is the purple. So the MXT, or mixed use transportation oriented zone that Terry talked about, has long proven somewhat problematic in how it's used in Prince George's County and how it's evolved. So with that, that zone has been removed from the new ordinance. So instead of a purple here, you will see a brown when you're looking at the proposed zoning map. And that is for multifamily residential up to 48 dwelling units per acre. And that just recognizes what's been built on Greenbelt Station South. So you'll see gray, green, yellow, pink, red, and then brown instead of the purple. And I think that about does it for an overview of the zoning, except for the standards. So with the current zone, there's a 10% green area requirement. Terry mentioned about 10% with the woodland conservation. The zone requires that as well. And then outdoor storage cannot be visible from the street. The setbacks of buildings in the front and the side are in the ballpark, the same in the current and the new. It's about 25-foot minimum setback from the front of each building from the street. From the side yard lines, it is 20 feet today from each side. Under the IH zone is 30 feet total. In the rear is 20 feet today. In the proposed, it'll be 20 feet from residential zones and 0 feet from other industrial zones or for non-residential zones. Just because the more of a innate mixed use nature is really advocated in the new ordinance. The big difference comes with regard to other standards. The form and design of buildings that are built in this zone, for example. There are really very few requirements of that today. That will change with the new zoning ordinance when it goes into effect. There'll be standards that require high quality materials, changing the building form. So it's not just big boxes. There's going to be some articulation and some features that are required to make those buildings more attractive and not overwhelm the community. And then there will be a mandatory 200-foot setback of any loading and service areas from adjacent residential zones under the new ordinance. So there are both industrial form and design standards, which I just went over, and also neighborhood compatibility standards that will apply to any non-residential development on this site or even townhouse development to the abutting residential on the west side, next to fronting on 51st Street. So I think that about does it for the zoning. I think it's back to Terry. Is that right?
Yes, thank you, Chad.
Yep, thank you.
Whoops, let me go here. Okay, so I'm just going to spend a few minutes now talking about the previous proposals that were shared with the community and the current status of the property. I think the mayor touched on this in his opening remarks, but I'm just going to say a little bit more about that. So the current property owner is a company from Bethesda called Finmark, who bought this site in June 2018 for $6.2 million, which is just over the current assessment of the property today. And shortly thereafter, the owner, the new owner, put the property under contract with Lennar Builders, a townhouse developer, in the hope that zoning issues could be resolved in order to enable them to build in this manner. As you heard from Chad just now, though, this kind of development is not currently allowed and probably not allowed under the future zone as well. So the concept up on the screen was presented at a North College Park Community Association meeting in February 2020. And, you know, as I mentioned, shows the entire site built out with townhouses and residential streets and some open space areas. I should emphasize, though, that no formal application to develop the site in this manner was ever filed, and no plan was ever formally reviewed by City of College Park staff or Park and Planning staff. So again, this plan, as shown, could not move forward without a change of zoning to the property. It's our understanding that the current status of the property is that the owner, Finmark, is looking at a couple of different offers that have been received from industrial users interested in buying the property. But unfortunately, I don't have any further information about the nature of those users or the status of those potential contracts. This slide may also look familiar to you. It shows another concept for developing the property with a combination of industrial and retail uses. And it was proposed by a company called Profish and was presented in a virtual conversation meeting convened by Councilmember Dernoga in October 2020. It shows an aquaculture campus where salmon would be farmed, processed, distributed, and sold at an on-site market and restaurant and brewery. So it's our understanding that the Profish business owners made an offer to purchase the property from Finmark, but this offer was not accepted, and it is not currently one of the industrial uses under consideration by the owner. So with that, I'm going to stop sharing my screen and move on to the next segment, which will look into a little more deeply the traffic and access assessment issues related to this site. So as I mentioned earlier, Kittleson and Associates was retained by the city, and they're going to talk about these issues in relationship to residential versus industrial use of the property. And I believe, Amelia, are you going to start us off?
I think Aditya actually will.
Oh, Aditya, okay.
Thanks, Jerry. And hello, everyone. My name is Aditya Inamdar. I'm joined today by my colleague, Amelia Martin. We're with a firm called Kittleson and Associates. We're a transportation planning and engineering firm. And as Jerry mentioned, we were hired by the city, mainly for this presentation to share information about, to give a background about what traffic impact assessment is, how we generally develop a study like that, looking at some kind of land use categories and understanding how different trips are generated in peak hours. Also to look at some of the access issues and opportunities surrounding this particular property. So we are primarily going to kind of share information, not specific to any one particular proposal or kind of rating one over the other. We are primarily going to share information in general. So with that, I'm going to hand it to Amelia to kind of take us through the traffic analysis aspects.
Great, thanks, Aditya. So hi again, everyone. My name is Amelia Martin, and I'm an engineer at Kittleson and Associates. This evening, we're going to start off by just giving some background on what a traffic impact analysis is and what goes into it. And then from there, we'll go into some trip generation rates and kind of compare for different uses. We'll look at a conceptual townhome program, and then we'll look at, what would be considered the ProFish program, and then do, just a comparison of the numbers between the two. Following that, I'm going to hand it back off to Aditya to go over the access conditions for the site. And then after that, I believe we'll be ready for question and answer. So with that, I first want to provide some background on what a traffic impact study is and what are the important parts of a study. So the first important piece are the rush hour conditions. Primarily in a traffic impact study, you're looking at the peak traffic conditions during a typical day. So that generally translates to the AM rush hour and then the PM rush hour. Occasionally, you may add a Saturday analysis if you have a site or a use that is expected to generate weekend traffic, but those are all things that get worked out in the process as you're determining what your study needs to include. But the most important part is that you're focusing on the peak hours when traffic is the worst. The second piece of a traffic impact study are, of course, figuring out what the study intersections are. This is typically done through a scoping process. You will have somebody who's conducting the study, and then you will have the entity or the parties that are reviewing the study. So before you actually start that, you have to come to an agreement on which intersections are actually going to be analyzed. This can be determined by things like the trip generation for the site, the development program, and also the local context for the site and traffic conditions. And then the last piece that's important in a traffic impact study are the different scenarios or the different years that you look at and you analyze. So of course you start off with existing conditions just to get an understanding of how things are operating currently. And then from there you add on traffic. So the first thing you add on is what's called background traffic. That accounts for things like background traffic growth due to population or economic growth. Then you also account for any roadway projects that may be happening in your study area or other developments that are being constructed or are approved to come online. And then after that, you look at your total future conditions. So once you have your background, you add on the site-specific traffic to see what incremental impact that new development has. All right, so the next important thing to know are the sources that are used to conduct the study and make recommendations. The first thing that's important to point out is the Institute of Transportation Engineers Trip Generation Manual. This has been around for several years. It's currently in its 10th edition and is really the standard that most jurisdictions use when they're coming up with trip generation estimates for different development programs. Again, this has been updated over the years to reflect changing travel trends, and the latest 10th edition was published in 2020. The next important piece is the Highway Capacity Manual, which is used to calculate delays at intersections. So if you're ever sitting at an intersection and you feel like it's taking you a long time to get through or make a turn at the intersection, the HCM is what allows traffic engineers to quantify how long you're waiting. Similar to the ITE Trip Generation Manual, this has been through several iterations. It's in its 6th iteration right now. And the Highway Capacity Manual is published by the Transportation Research Board, which is a subsection of the National Academies of Science. And then the last piece is really focusing on local guidance to balance trade-offs when you're making recommendations. Most of the time when you're dealing with traffic, you're thinking about three different things: the delays that you calculate with the highway capacity manual, the design constraints that may come from available right-of-way or conditions in the field, and then lastly, a safety component. So for example, you may find that it would be beneficial from a traffic perspective to add a right turn lane at an intersection, but that may have safety benefit trade-offs for pedestrians who now have a longer distance to cross when they're going across the street. So making those trade-offs is really important to have the local guidance that sets the standards for what each of those metrics or desired outcomes are in terms of safety, delay, and design. All right, so with all of that in mind, let's go ahead and talk about trip generation and parking rates for different kinds of uses. Please bear with this slide just a moment. This is just to show you where we're pulling the information on. The next slide will give more of an apples to apples comparison, looking at an equal amount of site. But generally here, what you're seeing are trip generation rates from ITE and also zoning code parking rates that would be used to calculate parking requirements. So here's probably the more useful slide to kind of compare these different uses to each other. This assumes the numbers from the previous table and also a 10-acre site with the densities allowed by zoning. So here, I'll just pause on this for a minute to let you all take a look. Unsurprisingly, you will notice that for the residential uses, single family residential would produce the lowest number of trips, although that would be a very low yield in terms of number of units. Age restricted housing, you would also get a pretty low amount of trips for the number of units that would be provided. In terms of the retail, I do want to point out that it is very typical for AM trips to be much lower than that of the PM, which is obviously reflected in these numbers here. And then for light industrial and manufacturing, that would generally yield a pretty low amount of trips, at least compared to a retail or an office use. And at least for ITE, there isn't much differentiation between light industrial and manufacturing in terms of number of trips that are generated. So next, we'll take a quick look at the conceptual townhome program, looking at that plan that Terry had shared. So generally, again, we're using ITE rates and assuming about 230 townhome units. With that, we would expect a development of that size to generate about 106 AM trips, 129 PM trips, and require about 469 spaces in parking. One thing to note is that non-auto reductions can be taken for some sites that have a more urban context, but those have not been applied in this case. Those sort of non-auto reductions are the type of thing that's worked out in the scoping process before the study is finalized and conducted. So next, we also looked at what a ProFish program might look like based on this plan from October 2020. So here again, using the same ITE assumptions with some different assumptions in terms of size for uses, we would expect it would generate more trips. During the AM peak, we'd estimate about 439. During the PM, about 659, and the required parking around 1,590 spaces. I would caveat that because ITE does not have an obvious land use code that matches the development program, given the mixed use nature of the programming for a site like this. ITE standard practice does allow you to account for synergy between different site uses, especially if you're dealing with residential and retail. You would expect to have a lower number of overall trips because some trips are being made between the uses on the site. But for now, we've just included these numbers for comparison purposes, and it would definitely, you definitely want to work out, what that synergy would look like between those uses. So here's a comparison of those numbers we just shared. You can see here the difference. Again, we would expect the townhomes would probably produce a lower amount of traffic. During the AM peak, about 333 for the difference. During the PM, about 530. And one piece I would note before we move on is that just because a trip generation program for a certain development may be higher than another doesn't necessarily equate to traffic impact. This is partially because the trips are distributed from several different directions. So that may mean when you have a more distributed network, you have less of an impact on, singular intersections. So access conditions to the site are important. And in addition, it also depends on how the intersections are already operating under background conditions. Sometimes there's excess capacity for certain intersections or certain movements that can actually absorb some of the increased travel demand. So with all of that in mind, I would like to pass it over to Aditya to talk about some of those access conditions.
All right, thanks, Amelia. Before, just a quick note before we go to access. I mean, what Amelia mentioned at the end is kind of really important to note, that what we showed here was not a traffic impact analysis. We were showing numbers based on kind of the traffic trip generation and parking requirement. We, as part of this particular analysis, we did not have counts for kind of, the study intersections, whether it's Rhode Island Avenue and University, or intersections or along Baltimore Avenue, Route 1. We didn't go into that level of detail, but any specific development proposal would need to kind of account for that. So analyze what the existing condition is, what capacity exists, and then what net additional trips will be generated and how they would be dispersed along this network. And so that would be kind of a more complete traffic impact analysis, which is not what we've done. We've compared land use categories to their trip generation rates and numbers. So with that, I want to kind of pivot to access analysis. So this particular map shows the existing roadway network. The stone property is kind of highlighted here in kind of pale orange color. And the street network is really kind of defined by the two major corridors, Greenbelt Road or University Boulevard, Maryland 193 as an east-west corridor, and then Route 1, Baltimore Avenue as a north-south corridor. These are kind of your regional connections to this area. And beyond that, most of the street network in the immediate vicinity of the site is kind of residential street network. Rhode Island Avenue, it's a little wider, it's kind of a connector street. But even Rhode Island Avenue is kind of a residential street. There are residential users fronting it. And the city in recent years has invested in Rhode Island Avenue to create a complete street with pedestrian and bicycle amenities. So it's a different kind of a street than what you would associate as a street that would provide access to industrial or kind of a major redevelopment project site. Could you go to the next slide, Amelia? So looking at kind of vehicular access to the site, right now, this is kind of the circuitous route that exists for the stone property. There is currently signage indicating this route as kind of the preferred access route for the industrial complex. So if you're coming from 193, we have to kind of use the intersection of Rhode Island Avenue and then make a U-turn on Locust Spring Road, and then use Branchville Road, 51st Avenue, and then get into that driveway that Terry mentioned earlier into the site. So this is kind of the access route that exists today. In the future, depending on the specifics of a site plan, there might be other access points that are opened up, or this may remain the only access point. Again, depending on the land use mix, it might be difficult to control specific circulation pattern as it might be with industrial, because if it's residential, residents would be using the entire street network in the neighborhood to kind of enter and exit this particular neighborhood. In part, that is good because there's a network, so traffic can filter, and each individual block and street may not experience a lot of new traffic. But also, given the fact that today the site doesn't have any specific use and is not active, and there are no trips coming in and out of the site, any redevelopment, whether it's industrial or residential, will generate new net additional trips. So the residents in the neighborhood may experience a increase in kind of the vehicular trips in the neighborhood as well. So one thing to note here, sorry, could you go back real quick? So one thing to note is there are few intersections along Route 1 where you have a signal which kind of become your kind of gateway streets into the neighborhood. So you have Hollywood Road, Fox Street, and then this is Delaware Street, and then Cherokee Street. These are kind of the streets with signalized intersections that along Route 1 corridor. So these streets may be used more frequently by people coming off of Beltway, coming north and south on Route 1 to kind of enter the neighborhood. So these streets may see some additional traffic as well. And then given the kind of the circuitous nature of this access from Locust Spring Road, Branchville, and 51st Avenue, that is likely to remain because given the topography just south of Branchville Road, it's unlikely to have a direct access to Greenbelt Road in this part. There's also some wooded areas south of Branchville Road, which would have some additional environmental conditions that we'll need to address for any direct connection. So, I mean, I don't want to kind of speculate, but it's unlikely that a new direct connection on 193 would be feasible in any near-time future. We go to the next slide. Lastly, I do want to highlight Greenbelt Station with Mark and Metro Station being a little over a mile from the study property. There is potential pedestrian bicycle connection from the kind of the cul-de-sac and the pathway up north near the station. And so it's about a mile walk or a bike ride from the Stone property to the station area. So that does provide kind of transit access to this site that some of the other sites do not have, including the recent townhomes on the other side of the tracks. At least for now, there is no direct connection to the Greenbelt Station from the townhome development. So this site does have that access. Again, given in the future, even if it's residential or industrial, having this access to transit station may help either the employees or residents kind of use transit as a mode to access the property. And that could kind of reduce some of the single occupancy car trips to the property. But again, that would depend on the specific land use mix and how those connections are provided from the site to the station in the future. Next slide. I think that's all the content we wanted to share. So I think we can open it up to any questions. Thank you.
Thanks, Aditya. So that ends the formal presentations for tonight. So this time is important now to hear from you. Katie Hart has been manning both the chat room and the Q&A. And Katie, if you're ready to start with questions, we'll turn it over to you.
Okay, yes. All right, we will go in order. So Terry, this is early on one of your slides that had the wetlands on it. I don't know if you want to go back to it or not, but the question was, what makes the wetlands potential? Have they not been surveyed, or is it something where the water table might be impacted? Or do you mean that this might be reserved as undevelopable land because it's marshy?
So the reason it's labeled potential is because it has not, to my knowledge, been formally delineated. And so in any kind of redevelopment of the site, a natural resources inventory would need to be prepared and identify important environmental features of the site, including woodlands, wetlands, and in this case, it's wooded wetlands. And in my experience, it would be very unlikely that that segment of the property could be redeveloped, but that would need to be determined in a formal application process.
Okay. And then we had a question, I think Chad was going to answer this one about the height limits based on the zoning.
Thank you, Katie, and thank you for that question. There actually is no height limit in the I2 zone under the current zoning ordinance. We have 5 industrial zones and only one of them has a height limit today. In the new zoning ordinance, there also is no height limit. Both zones, the I2 and the IH, current and new, share an increased setback requirement for every foot above a certain height. In a current ordinance, it's every foot above 35 feet. And then in a new ordinance, it's above 50 feet. Once you exceed 35, additional setback kicks in at that point. So hopefully that makes some sense. But essentially, the height is limited by the program and the needs, and often, as is the case in industrial as well as our commercial zones, the parking requirement.
Okay, and then we have quite a few questions about the traffic impacts. So the first one is, how do the traffic models differentiate between type of traffic in the number of trips? Is that normalized for the size of vehicle expected, i.e. heavy industry is likely to have a lot more 18-wheelers?
Yeah, I can start with that one. So I guess I would note two different things. So in the trip generation numbers that we provided, that includes both passenger vehicle traffic and also, truck traffic and those types of trips. So that's a number that gets included. And then when you go and you do your traffic models, there are ways to account for, heavy vehicles, delivery vehicles, in terms of the calculations that are done when you're doing your capacity analysis. So you have to go back at a certain point to make your assumptions about what percentage of the trips coming to the site are passenger vehicle versus truck traffic. But then after that, you can incorporate that into the models to make sure that, you're accounting for some movements at certain intersections carrying more, truck traffic than others.
Okay. All right, I'm gonna stick with the traffic questions for the moment. Someone just had a comment about the most direct route. So they're suggesting that Rhode Island Avenue to Blackfoot Place and then a left onto 51st would be most direct, they think.
Yeah, Katie, can I quickly respond to that?
Sure.
So I agree. I mean, looking at the map, that's kind of direct route, but Blackfoot Place has multiple speed bumps along it. And especially for industrial uses, there's specific signage that indicates the route that I showed on the map for access to the industrial land uses. So in future, if it's a residential development and there are multiple access points like the townhome site plan showed, the direct route would be, some of the other streets like Blackfoot.
Okay. Another question, what are the barriers to connecting Branchville to 193 east of Rhode Island Avenue between Rising Sun and the open field with the gas pipes? Even a one-way inlet to the neighborhood that way seems like it might circumvent the U-turn issues.
So I think if I understand this correctly, are we talking about a connection kind of extending 51st Avenue to 193? If that's the option, I mean, I kind of alluded to this condition when I was presenting that there's a steep topography change from Greenbelt Road to Branchville Road, and there's also wooded areas, and then SHA would probably be involved in kind of a new access, a potential new signal. So it's a much larger project, and again, I don't want to speak for SHA or some of the property owners south side of Branchville Road, but there is no right-of-way there. So there will be a right-of-way impacts, property would need to be purchased in the wooded areas. So there will be environmental issues that need to be handled. And then the topography change would also need to be handled. So there are a lot of challenges. I don't know, Terry, if you want to add anything.
I think actually what the question is about if you look at the map that we're looking at now, there's where the kind of the turn is at the west side of Branchville Road. That building just to the west of it is Rising Sun. It's more in that area that they're talking about doing an inlet in from Greenbelt Road.
Yes, so it's more at the western end of Branchville Road. So Aditya, you can speak to this, but I think the issue there, well, there's still slope and right-of-way issues, but also proximity to the major intersection of 193 and Rhode Island Avenue. So that's what comes to mind for me.
Yeah, SHA would probably not permit a new kind of a street connection so close to the intersection. I think there is a right turn lane at that point, so it's going to impact how that signalized intersection of Rhode Island and 193 operate.
Thank you.
Okay. So the next one is, regardless of the development option, in order to minimize traffic impact on the residential neighborhood, can we explore extending 51st Place up to the property line? The intervening property between this property and the current end of 51st Place is apparently not in use, at least according to Google Maps.
Maybe I'll take a stab at that first, because I did drive through this area recently, and the property is very much in use right now. It seems to be mostly auto body, repair shops, auto repair shops, warehouse uses, but you can see with the map on the screen that 51st Place dead ends into that property. And there are two existing buildings there, and then parking surrounding them, surface parking. So this would require acquisition of right-of-way through there, and you would have an issue of not creating a non-conforming use for the existing properties there by limiting the amount of parking available to them. So those are just some difficulties that exist for creating that access. I don't know, Aditya, if you have anything to add.
Yeah, no, I think you covered it well. One thing I'll highlight is, regardless of whether 51st Place provides access to the site, the challenge with especially the truck movement from Rhode Island Avenue to Locust Spring Road, Branchville Road, or any of the other residential streets would remain a challenge because a lot of these streets are pretty narrow. A lot of them don't even have sidewalks. The intersections are not very wide. And some of the larger trucks that we associate with industrial uses specifically do need pretty wide intersections to make those turns, and the widths of the streets as well. And given the context, that challenge would remain.
Okay, I'm just seeing some additional comments related to that. It says the specific property that 51st Place dead ends into is P1. It's fenced off, but has a clear sight line through, likely without affecting the warehouse on P1.
Yes, I mean, those are one-story buildings there and surface parking, as I mentioned. So there is a clear sight line through there, but there is striped parking in the lots for those two buildings and their various businesses. So any kind of right-of-way through there would have to take property and would impact those parking spaces. Not that it can't be done, but it would perhaps change the nature of what could happen with those existing uses.
Okay. And someone is asking if additional property could be acquired at the southernmost portion of the current residential area, would that be an acceptable access point?
Aditya, do you want to take that?
Yeah, so let me understand, which location are we talking about? Branchville Road, south of there?
51st and Branchville, I believe,
The southernmost portion, Branchville and 51st, yes.
Right, right. So, oh, you mean for the property access like a driveway to the property, right? So yeah, I mean that would probably reduce kind of this existing access connection. But if you remember Terry's map earlier, the wooded areas and wetlands are in that location. So depending on what the environmental issues are identified as part of kind of a detailed site plan review, that location may not provide a direct connection all the way to the area on the site where redevelopment is possible. Terry, do you want to add anything to that?
So I don't know that that would be adequate for all the reasons you stated previously for industrial, but certainly as we saw in the townhouse proposal, there is the opportunity somewhere in the vicinity to create additional access into the site. So again, we don't have full applications, full information about the proposals that have been made, but in any future redevelopment, we would have that information and that would be assessed and reviewed.
Yeah, and just to kind of clarify, I mean, right now we just have limited information and there is no specific site plan that we were kind of analyzing. So we are kind of trying to analyze based on limited information we have. And that's why some of these challenges, not that they cannot be overcome, right? Like you can acquire property, build a new street, even if for wetlands, you can have mitigations, but it's just that there's just a lot of unknowns and we're just trying to analyze some of the kind of the issues and opportunities here.
Okay, we have a comment just about the 180 turnoff Rhode Island Avenue onto Locust Spring Road to get to Branchville Road is very tight, especially for tractor trailers with 53-foot trailers.
Yeah.
Yes.
And then a question about when determining the number of parking spaces for residential, do you take into account the difference of residents in a college town?
So the number for parking rates come from Prince George's County zoning code. So it's something that the county has mandated. I don't know all the details about how that number can be reduced. Maybe there are some certain incentives or, you know, based on specific proposals, there might be options to reduce that parking requirement. But that number is from the county zoning code.
Okay. For traffic purposes, is there a reason an overpass or underpass of the railroad couldn't be created on Branchville Road from Greenbelt and College Park?
Yeah, again, I think it's possible. It might be cost prohibitive, or there might be just depending on, you know, who owns all the railroad right of ways, the coordination, and all of that. But I don't know, Terry or anyone else, do you want to respond?
So I think that in order to fully answer the question, a detailed study would need to be done, a feasibility study looking at the options, possible locations, right of way, detailing the constraints and the costs. So as you said, nothing is really impossible, but sometimes constraints make it infeasible, and mostly because of the cost.
Okay. And if road expansion is required to create feeder routes on Blackfoot or Indian and on 51st Avenue, who would pay for that?
So as part of a traffic impact analysis, which you've heard has not been done today, and may or may not be required in the future, depending on the nature of development that is proposed on the stone site, there would need to be an analysis done. And part of that is providing for adequate transportation facilities. So those would be assessed. And if it was found that roads needed to be widened or a bridge needed to be constructed, those might come out of a traffic impact analysis. And if it was a result of the proposed new development, typically that would fall to the developer. But there's also a number of cost sharing programs that could be devised, various grants and things of that nature. But typically that would fall to the developer.
Okay, we have a comment from a resident that lives on Blackfoot Place, and they can say that the street is still used, even with the speed bumps, by heavy vehicles, and is used as the more direct route. So they're curious about how the most direct route was calculated.
So we didn't so this is not a direct route. This is the assigned route right now. There is a sign at this intersection of, where Locust Spring Road and Rhode Island Avenue meet, that kind of the U-turn location, which has an arrow pointing towards Branchville Road as the route for trucks to get to the industrial complex or industrial land uses. So that's what we've mapped here as kind of what the wayfinding signs currently indicate should be the route. This is not meant to show a direct route.
Okay, there's a comment about the townhouse brings additional access in at Apache, directly next door to an existing single-story house. I think that's just a comment.
Yeah, I mean, the townhome site plan did show a lot of entry points. Some of them may be on wetlands. So again, that site plan was not like a formal site plan that was submitted for review. So I don't think staff at the city or Park and Planning reviewed it. So it was kind of used only for the purposes of references for this presentation.
Okay, is the industrial site suitable to include a future data center or data warehouse?
That sounds like a Chad question.
I was just gonna probably unmute and volunteer for that one. So the Economic Development Corporation of the county is very interested in data centers right now and is looking at a number of initiatives. It's possible there could be some interest in a data center here. However, data centers, from what we're hearing from the EDC, are really interested in redundant power. So they really want to be closer to different power lines and substations than what this site may offer. There is one right across the rail, but there's some logistical challenges to getting everything over to CSX lines. So it's not to preclude that option, but I think that it's probably a little bit more of a challenging site than many other opportunity sites in the county. And just in general for the College Park area, there's a lot of interest in the Discovery District for data center location.
Okay.
Thanks, Chad.
Someone wrote, they recall the hotel was impacted by height restrictions because of its proximity to the airport. Is this close enough to the airport for that to be a possible factor?
That sounds like me again. Short answer is no. The aviation policy area, as it's called, which overlaps much of Route 1, including the hotel and the other tower buildings that are either complete or under construction and in concept there, ends about 900 feet south of this property.
Okay. About the traffic, are you essentially saying that you can't provide us with more detail regarding access and actual traffic impact until a proposed use is in place?
Yeah, a little bit, because we don't know what's the specific land use program or number of units or square footage, because there isn't a specific development proposal on the table right now.
But I think it's safe to say the access issues
Right.
remain the same. So the impact may vary depending on the type of use, residential or industrial or certainly the type of residential. So the access issues are the same. So there could be a more in-depth theoretical study done on access with various recommendations or options.
Yeah.
Wouldn't you say, Aditya?
Yeah. I mean, we could, again, depending on kind of the data that's available, especially in the last 1 year due to COVID, the traffic counts are kind of all over the place. So it's a little hard to establish a true existing conditions right now. But, theoretically, we can do an analysis where we look at the existing conditions along Route 1, 193, and Rhode Island Avenue, identify some of the key intersections, whether they're signalized or some along Rhode Island Avenue, take some traffic counts, turning volume counts, understand what's the volumes out there, what's the capacity, and just understand like how much more this network can accommodate as is versus at what point would additional improvements be needed to expand capacity. Amelia, I don't know if you want to add anything.
No, I think that's a great overview. Yeah, I think that's generally how I would maybe approach an analysis like that, just doing a sensitivity analysis of, where the existing network is right now, how well it's operating, and how much more it could take on. On that note, I will say to people, or just, for folks as reference, we have had a lot of success in collecting traffic counts during this time and doing some adjustments with available data. Also partially because improvements at intersections generally come in big chunks. If you're going to be adding something like a turn lane or an additional through lane or doing some widening or anything like that. So there really isn't, there's a lot of room for sort of sensitivity to change those things, because very rarely are you just on the cusp of needing something or not needing something from a capacity perspective.
Oh, I see Tom with his hand raised.
Yeah, I just wanted to weigh in for a second on this because I'm hearing we have a lot of traffic questions. And I'd say a couple of things. Number one, I think the traffic analysis is good. I think the consultants provided a good analysis of the overall two proposals that were put forth in the past. I think they've done a good job of caveating that that doesn't really reflect what might come in the future. And I think the concern that I have is that it's an analysis that shows two particular possibilities that are probably not going to happen. So it doesn't really provide information that the public's looking for currently. Because I see in the chat, people want to know, well, what might be coming, what other options are there? So the analysis was correct but limited. And I want to acknowledge again that you put the proper caveats, but I just want to make sure the public understands that there's limited value to the two scenarios that were shown. And the potential scenarios of development are innumerable. And I think one of the ones that would be interesting to see, but I'm not sure how much value there would be in it, is a heavy industrial use, because some heavy industrial use would be very few automobile vehicles, but many more heavy truck vehicles. So you would have a trade-off of the types of impacts. But without any type of proposal on the table, we were dealing in a lot of speculation. And I think that that's a concern. I think the public needs to take away from this, that when something comes forward, there will be much more analysis and more public involvement at that time.
Thank you. Yes, we do have multiple comments and questions about that. I will continue trying to finish up with these traffic questions, and then we can move on to some of the other questions. We had a comment about the signage referring to the Branchville Industrial Park on 51st Place, not Stone Industries on 51st Avenue. They're saying with reference to signage directing to specific properties.
I'm not certain about that question. I don't, are they saying that there is a sign directing traffic to the Stone site that's not the same as traffic directed to the industrial park as a whole? I don't recall that. And of course, the Stone site is vacant now. So I'm not certain how to answer that.
Okay, I think it was just a comment
Okay.
pointing it out, the signage, that the signage refers to Branchville Industrial Park on 51st Place, not specifically to Stone Industries on 51st Avenue.
That's my understanding, yes.
Okay. A comment about someone would be more concerned with traffic calming than road widening. That we don't have sidewalks down here. People rightly walk in the road constantly.
Right, and that's, yeah, and that's what I was trying to highlight is the context is very residential, narrow streets. And then we have the industrial property. So that does possess a challenge in terms of kind of access and how the circulation works.
Okay. Rhode Island, Route 193 and Greenbelt Road are a rush hour bottleneck. What will be used to handle this and the new Methodist Church Guild School at Rhode Island Avenue and Hollywood Road, bringing more than 100 vehicles during rush hour?
Aditya, do you want me to start with this one?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, great. So I think I'll refer back to kind of the process for a study. So, you know, a study would look at how those intersections and areas are operating currently. And then you would analyze a background condition that would add those additional trips from those developments on top at that intersection to then see how it would operate. And then from there, you know, you'd add on additional site traffic for the Stone property. In terms of what you would do to fix that problem, frankly, I can't really know until we've collected the data and done, you know, some capacity analysis and that sort of thing to just see where the trade-offs might be. One of the best things to look at in terms of improvements are improvements to signal timing, just to see if there are signals that are already at those intersections that can be optimized to better accommodate traffic flow. But other than that, you know, I can't really tell you right now with confidence which approaches or intersections would need to have turn lanes added or through lanes or anything like that. But it's helpful to know that's an area of concern. That's the type of feedback that's helpful to know when scoping a study.
Okay. And then a question about what information was used to generate the trip numbers for ProFish.
Yeah, let me go ahead and pull that back up just for people's reference. So these were the assumptions that we used. This was from a previous site plan, so just some numbers that we had been provided in terms of size. And then the information used here are based on ITE trip generation rates. So, you know, then we get a rate per, 1,000 square feet of different use. And then we multiply those rates, add them together, and that's how you get the information in this table.
Okay. We have a question about what are the stormwater and hydraulic pressure impacts?
I don't know that anyone has an answer to that question at this time, since again, this is not a specific development proposal with an application that has provided us with any of that information.
Okay. Previous developers had phase 1 and phase 2 environmental assessments done. Can we get access to those reports?
That's a good question. So I know the assessments were done under the purview of the Maryland Department of the Environment, and I believe that is public information and can be made available or is available online. But I can look into that further.
Okay. The conceptual townhome program presented seems to fill every portion of the property with residential structures. Is that realistic given the county's woodland preservation requirements?
No, I think as mentioned earlier, I don't think it's realistic because it showed the entire site pretty much covered with development. There are roadways and some open space shown as well. It's just hard to assess because, again, the application was never filed and we did not have access to complete information.
Okay. And someone wanted Terry to repeat your comments about Profish and their current disposition from earlier in your presentation.
Yes, so I mentioned earlier that Profish had made an offer to the existing property owner, Finmark. It was a purchase offer that was considered by Finmark. It was not accepted, and so there is no current negotiation underway between Finmark, the existing property owner, and Profish. Whether or not Profish is looking at alternative locations in the city or in the county, I have no knowledge of that.
Okay. Someone is asking, what are the possible projects that might happen? Because it sounds like neither presentation we have seen is in process presently.
Well, I also mentioned earlier that the current property owner, Finmark, has indicated to the city, but we don't have any specific information about two other industrial uses who have expressed interest in the property and may have submitted formal purchase offers to the owner. So certainly if an offer is accepted and a project comes forward, then we would have additional information to share. But at this time, I'm afraid we just don't have that information.
Okay. Is the city or county in any position to follow up with Profish or otherwise incentivize them to bring a new bid to the table?
So I really don't speak for the city council as a body, or certainly for the county. And I'm not aware of any programs that the city has to offer specifically to Profish. The county has a much bigger organization, especially through their Economic Development Corporation. And they may, in fact, have something to offer them. But again, I just don't have knowledge of that.
Okay, we have a comment that North College Park is in dire need for commercial real estate development, so Profish would be a great addition to actually build a community. How would it also grow in conjunction with other local businesses?
Because it's not a proposal that we're currently reviewing or entertaining, it was in the past, but is not now. I just have a hard time answering that question. We do have a commercial district north of here along Rhode Island Avenue, the Hollywood Commercial District, and that's where we have a concentration of retail uses. There is the potential for higher density retail development at that location. And I do think that commercial district you know, at the center of a major intersection and already serving the community would be a better location for retail than this particular site, but I'm expressing my opinion.
Okay, we do have a comment from an attendee saying they still want ProFish to come to North College Park. They would like the city to reach out to ProFish and the landowner to come to an agreement. They don't think we need any more housing. College Park has so much growth in buildings and housing, it's not recognizable, and we can't handle the traffic in the neighborhood as it is. And then I have a question about what can residents do to influence or keep track of this development since it's privately held and they apparently don't like ProFish.
Well, certainly the city's planning department could, or the city's economic development manager could, you know, try to follow what's going on with this property and then inform the community once we have some news to share.
Okay, we have questions about what is the city pushing something specific as far as development or have a preferred option?
No, the city doesn't have a preferred plan for development of this site, no.
Okay, and is there a timeline for determining what happens with the property? Does it depend on the current property owner or other factors like when may the public have more information about what the actual use will be and therefore potential traffic impacts?
So as we all know, this is private property and those transactions happen privately and then they become part of the public record. So sometimes we know while they're happening, sometimes we only know after the fact. So because the city is not involved in these negotiations, we have to wait and see what happens between the private parties involved in any kind of transaction. And now it's likely that a user could come in and just lease the existing space that's available on site. And in that case, there would be no formal review by city or county staff. So it really depends on the nature of what happens in the future. Who buys the property, what uses are proposed, and what kind of process those uses trigger. And so we really are not in a position to really speculate about the future. And so tonight was really about looking at the two past proposals and comparing them in terms of impact, and also just getting everyone to think about the future of the property and what your vision for this property might be. Do you foresee it staying in industrial use over time? And if so, what type of industrial use? Or do you see it transitioning to some kind of residential use? I venture to say, I don't know when, but at some point in the next few years, the city should undergo a new master plan. And during a study like that, these are the kinds of issues that would be delved into in great detail by Maryland National Capital Park and Planning Commission. So at this time, I'm not aware of any planned study like that. So we're just really trying to look at the site and generate a conversation about its possible future, having past experience of these two very different proposals before us, a ProFish mixed use development and a townhouse proposal.
And I see Fazul has his hand raised.
Yeah, thank you. I have actually a question, very quick one. I don't know if you already have answered it to Aditya. Do you know, the question is about the traffic count. Do you know if these numbers are related anyway on the pandemic situation they're currently in? Are they taken from recent count, or will the numbers be the same when the pandemic is over?
Are you talking about the trip generation numbers
Right,
you
right,
presented? So
correct.
they're purely theoretical. They come from the ITE standards for the type of land use. So they are not impacted by COVID, or I don't know in future. I mean, Amelia, maybe you'll be able to talk about future ITE numbers if COVID has like a more lasting impact. But these are not counts. These are theoretical numbers. Amelia, do you want to add to that?
Yeah, I'll just jump in on that. I would say, yeah, Aditya's correct in the fact that the ITE rates are based on multiple sites. And so that's all data that's been collected at those sites pre-pandemic. And then from there, they do some statistical smoothing to figure out what are, averages and plot the different data sites. And there are a bunch of methodologies and procedures that you have to follow to be to have your data accepted by ITE. So they're very strict about their collecting procedures to make sure that you aren't collecting during an abnormal time. So I would imagine, their future editions are not going to include any COVID data, but the numbers presented tonight do not include any of the COVID impacts to traffic.
And Amelia, am I right in saying that these are national numbers?
That's correct.
Right? Yeah. So this isn't like a national standard for, say, single family, how many trips would be generated, national standard for retail, that kind of thing.
Thank you.
And I see Mr. Denoga has his hand raised as well.
Yes, I wanted to follow up on something that Terry said, because Terry's optimistic, but unfortunately incorrect, but we need to work on that. Park and Planning has released its 6-year work program, and there is nothing for the North College Park area in terms of planning. And I have been, this just came out last week. There's a budget here, or a review tomorrow afternoon, Park and Planning, and I and other council members are dissatisfied with the Park and Planning position. They are slow walking master plan analysis throughout the county. And they do not put enough budget dollars or staff personnel behind the master planning. And that's a decision that they've made internally. And there will be budget hearings at the end of the month. And I think it would behoove the city to speak out at the budget hearing and ask for an updated master plan. So I want to bring this to the public's attention. There's nothing for North County in the next 6 years, and there hasn't been for the last several years. And I think it's a serious oversight. And I know Chad and Steve Rowe are listening, and I'm talking to you guys. Park and Planning has enough money to spend $1,000 a square foot for a new office building for their headquarters. Think about that, $1,000 a square foot has been authorized for a new office building. Even when the county has 25% vacancy rates in office buildings around the county, they could actually build an office building here. But I think it's a serious issue that there's no near-term plan for comprehensive planning for the College Park and northern portion of the county. So please weigh in and at the budget hearing coming up at the end of the month. And please weigh in with your city officials to encourage them to take a stand.
Gone ahead and put our contact information in the chat for all the attendees so they can reach out to us directly for more information on the budget hearings.
Okay, thank you. We have a question of, will the city reach out for residents' input when and if another proposal is submitted?
Yes, the city will inform the community if there is a development proposal, and the city council and staff will review the proposal, provide opportunity for comment by any interested residents. That's part of our regular process.
My office will do the same.
Okay, and is the city able to provide the property concerns to the current owners for potential buyers to understand prior to purchase with plans contrary to city desires?
Certainly, we can share the results of this meeting with the property owner, yes.
Okay, and then we got some more comments in support of Profish. So agree, Profish is a much better option than additional townhomes. That was one comment. Agreed to that. A Profish type development would really attract folks. If it's just another industrial area, it does nothing to help the city grow as a community. So that was another comment. There's a question of, would Profish have an associated smell and for what radius?
I don't know that anyone on the panel tonight could answer that question.
I can actually.
Oh, you
Um,
can? Okay, great.
Yeah, I know. So this is secondhand information. One of our neighbors actually. I don't know if she's on here. She been to the current facility in Washington D.C. and she was around and she could not smell anything. So I'm just quoting her.
Okay, and we just got a few more recent comments. Another one is, as a resident of Hollywood, we are very excited about the prospect of Profish in the neighborhood. We need more businesses and community fixtures like this in North College Park. Another comment, Profish has so many fantastic aspects about it. It does not smell. I have been to their original site. Oh, and I see Maria Mackey has her hand up.
Yeah, I meant to lower it. I was also gonna echo what my colleague said, that I've talked to a resident that visited the original Ivy City place, and there's no smell problem. And actually my son also visited there, and he said that you couldn't even tell that there was a fish plant there. And you have to understand too that this is aquaculture, and so they have to be careful and mitigate for odors and stuff. So that's all I know about that. So I wanted to share that with the person that was concerned. Thank you.
Thank you. Someone else is asking, could there be a building like the torpedo factory in Virginia?
Can we go to Chad?
Yes, sorry, Terry. So what was the question again? I'm sorry, Katie.
Could there be a, sorry.
Oh, could there be a building like the torpedo factory in Virginia?
You know, one of these days I do need to go to the torpedo factory myself and see what it's all about. So arts related uses, some eating and drinking establishments, perhaps. Yes, those would be permitted in this zone. So that's a possibility, but it would really come down to market preference and location. I think the location is a challenge for that kind of use, just to be honest about that. Just from the perspective that it's harder to see and harder to get to, which is some of the themes we've been talking about today.
Mm-hmm. Another comment about Profish. Someone used to live near the one in Ivy City, and it was great to see the development in the area. They're sad to see an opportunity for great development like this lost, and they also say it did not smell. Back to the traffic questions. Was trip generation generated by the proponents of the townhome project and Profish? If so, what information, or was that information reviewed by the consultants?
I can maybe jump in on this. I actually had this very question for Terry when we were first speaking with her, if there had already been any trip generation information developed, and the answer to that was no, at least not to our knowledge. So we have not had the chance to review any information like that.
Okay. It seems that the county has zoning that can make this property very dense. It seems that allowing unlimited type of development would be better on property that doesn't have neighborhood roads to connect the industrial dense development to bigger roads. It seems a use like Profish is better for the community as they were providing community uses and less dense than the unlimited development that is possible. What can the county or city do to help with appropriate development to match the existing roads?
So we go back to the council members' comment about lack of a current plan and study that looks at this area, takes the big view about our local network of streets and looks at appropriate land uses so close to our residential neighborhood. So I think the council member knows it's been since 1989 since the city of College Park had a master plan to call its own. So what can the city do? Again, this is private property and the owner is currently looking to sell the property to an appropriate user. And at this time, an appropriate user would be an industrial user because the zoning currently does not support residential uses except in the very extremely limited way that Chad Williams described earlier. And the new zoning ordinance would open that up a little bit through a special exception process. So I think the future offers more opportunity and you know, certainly the city, you know, knows who this property owner is and can reach out to the property owner. And that was another reason for the meeting tonight to hear from the residents. And I hear mixed views about what folks would like to see on this property. And I understand that it's difficult, but certainly the city doesn't have much of a say, but we can enter into conversations as we have in the past with this property owner. But it's a private property matter right now, so we can't tell this property owner who to sell to and necessarily make a difference. That's just the way it is.
Okay, I see Councilmember Dernoga raised his hand again.
Yeah, I actually want to ask Chad Williams if he could weigh in on the comment. I do respect Mr. King's opinion on many things, but my question is it correct to suggest that there could be dense development on this property under the current zoning or the future zoning? I mean, I know there's residential allowed under the new zoning ordinance, but it seemed like that's limited.
Yes, thank you, Councilmember. The residential would be limited. It would be capped at 12 to 20 units per acre on the high end, which is akin to garden style walk-ups at the maximum. I wouldn't say that the zoning either today or in the future allows for dense. There are a lot of more intense industrial uses that would be possible here. But given the location, I'm not sure that they're particularly desirable. A lot of these uses would like independent rail spurs, which since this is a commuter rail line, that's not very likely.
Question, Chad.
Sure, sir.
Residential and the heavy industrial, is that by right that they could do up to 12 units per acre, or is there some expectations or requirements to get there?
For almost all the residential uses except convent or monastery in the new ordinance, it would require special exception approval.
Okay, so I think that's important to understand. I hesitate to get into too much detail, but I'll just say this. The current property owner bought land zoned heavy industrial with the intent to build residences. It was pure speculation. And when they came to me, I told them to seek a rezoning and they didn't want a rezoning. They wanted to get a amendment to the zoning ordinance to allow residential and industrial, which we did not ultimately agree to let happen. So I'm not sure they're trying to sell the property for residential to someone else who wants to take a stab at that. But my understanding, which is based on hearsay, is that Lennar signed a contract or some type of agreement with them based on getting the 230 dwelling units, which was at a very large number. And they still think they can get that large number from other people, whether it's for residential or industrial. And apparently that's what's the gap between Profish and Finmark, is what's the proper valuation of the property. Now, I've never believed that 230 dwelling units is appropriate for that site. So I'm not sure that the basis upon which Finmark may be, calculating what the value of the land is appropriate. But at the moment, it's their land and they can ask whatever they want for it. But I think that's where the gap is between Profish and Finmark. I don't know that the new zoning ordinance is going to help them any. I don't know that they can get the industrial users to come in and pay the amount of money that they got from offered from Lennar. So I think all of us, much like Terry said, we're all just waiting. It's kind of out of our hands, but I don't think it's a good idea for myself or the county to suggest that there could be dense residential development on this property when it's not zoned for it, and the master plan that does exist did not call for it. I did raise that question with Finmark's attorney in my first conversation. You want 13 dwelling units per acre, and the master plan says 4.2, because they were arguing the master plan calls for residential, transition on this property. But they only wanted the portion of the master plan that suggested residential transition. They did not want any part of the master plan that said 4.2 dwelling units per acre. So they kind of wanted their cake and eat it too. So I think there is an argument to be made in the next master plan that this property be rezoned to residential, but I think that argument would be that it be rezoned at a much lower density than has been discussed by Finmark, much more consistent with the master plan that exists. But that's why you do a master plan process. Everybody gets to weigh in, and you can look at the broader traffic issues and development issues during that process. So I hope we can actually get a College Park master plan process going soon.
Thank you. And I see Councilmember Kennedy has her hand raised as well.
Great, thank you. Thank you for this presentation tonight and for everyone joining us. I wanted to back up and observe a little that what I'm seeing both in the comments and with some side conversations I've been having is people are really excited about the idea of a white table restaurant, a sit-down restaurant in the neighborhood. And so I'm wondering if you could address or talk a little bit about how we could attract that sort of business here, whether it's Profish or it's somebody else. I think that there is a real desire for that and a want for that. And this is bigger than the Stone property, but maybe it could be in a commercial district like you mentioned, but are there other things we could be doing, or why haven't we been attracting that kind of business here? And what could we be doing to do it? And I'll just say it, the streetscape is one of them. I know that. Terry, so you can talk about that.
That's what I'm going to say. But the other issue, I think, is one of density. So North College Park is still a low density neighborhood when you compare it with downtown College Park, with the mixed use buildings. And sure, there are a lot of students, but in the Midtown section, there are also several apartment buildings, which adds to the density. And, any kind of retailer looks at population. What is the market? Is the market there for me? Is it going to be supported? And I'll say again that I believe the Hollywood Commercial District is a much better place for retail than the Stone property, given its location and access.
Yeah, and I agree with that. Is it safe to say, Terry, that there's almost a trade-off too, and that to attract those kind of businesses, we need more residents, but with more residents, we have more traffic. And so there's sort of a domino effect going back and forth. And so if we want this, we're going to have to suffer through this, or, you know, maybe there's some magical solution out there, but it's sort of a tough situation to be in, I think, right?
Well, it is, and that's why you look at access to transit. You look at alternative means of transportation, which the city is doing. We're well served by buses. We have our own micro mobility share system along with the university. So more people are walking and biking. So, you know, the Hollywood Commercial District and the Stone property, you know, as Aditya said, and you can see it on this slide, it's not that far from the Greenbelt Metro Station. So it is an attractive location, but the density, I think, does restrict to a certain extent the opportunities for retail at this time.
Thanks, Terry.
Okay. There was a question, I have to find it, about bringing up the traffic count slide again.
Yep, give me just 1 second.
Sure.
They're not traffic counts.
Yeah, it's an estimate. I believe this is the slide they are probably looking for.
So again, it's trip generation, not actual traffic counts on roadways.
Correct. And this is from the Institute of Transportation Engineers, ITE 10th edition. The required parking is from the zoning code.
Okay. And we have a question. If the Profish project is off the table, why was the consultant paid to analyze this use?
So because we had these two, if you will, competing proposals, residential and a rather unusual mixed use and industrial kind of proposal, the one thing question that was out there in the community was traffic. So there didn't seem to be a good understanding about the traffic, in particular the trips that would be generated by these two very different uses. So even though neither proposal seems to be feasible at this particular time, we thought it would be a useful exercise because even tonight, we've heard many people express support of the Profish proposal. So we thought it would be useful just to share this general information, not a specific traffic impact analysis, just so it could be better understood the impacts of various uses. And I think this slide does a really good job of indicating the differences in the various land uses and the kind of traffic that is generated by each one. So this is really just for education and for information.
Okay, and can the public have access to the details of the traffic analysis and the assumptions used in the calculations?
Yes.
And I would just say that there's nothing too exciting about it. It's the rates on this slide times the sizes on this slide. It's just some simple multiplication there.
And I'll also add that if a particular development proposal goes through development review and has to do a traffic impact analysis, these same rates will be used in their calculation. So it was mentioned before that these are national standards. So there are national standards that are used in conjunction with local guidelines to prepare a traffic impact analysis.
Oh, and I think someone wants to see the slide that compares the Profish and the residential. Okay, just a comment about density, that we were told that we could never get a supermarket because of lack of density. Then came along Lidl and the new supermarket in the Bizzuto building.
They came with residential. That was a big part of it, I think, right, Terry? Like those areas, residential came first and then the supermarkets came.
So the Bizzuto project is a reference to what's being called Southern Gateway. And so that's in the southern part of Route 1, right on Route 1. It's a mixed-use development with almost 70,000 square feet of retail. And I forget how many dwelling units, but it's an extremely large project that will provide market rate housing, not student housing, but in an area that's also redeveloping with a lot of new student housing. So the population density in the southern part of town is increasing quite a bit. And in regard to the Lidl location, in the vicinity, there's also a couple of market rate apartment buildings and student housing within walking distance of that facility, which does make a difference.
Okay. Other than mitigating traffic, what is the benefit of placing townhomes in this location relative to Profish?
I don't think we're here to sell either proposal, so I would hesitate to answer that. It really depends on what the city's vision is. The city recently completed a strategic plan, which does state pretty clearly that additional housing of all types is needed in the city, including affordable housing, townhomes, and age-restricted housing. So that's about all I could say about that.
And is the city planning on buying the property?
Not to my knowledge.
Okay. Just a comment about if only we could leave it to the squirrels and bunnies. Another comment. So for those of us who sat in on both the townhouse and Profish proposals, the majority of us would support the Profish project. I understand that their offer has not been accepted, but the townhouse proposal was certainly not the desired use. So that's a comment. Another comment. The attractiveness of Profish was that it included retail, educational, and public space. The educational aspect was especially appealing to many of the residents attending the proposal. Another comment, someone that did not like the Profish plan, it would seem to add a lot of traffic on these small residential streets, and they agree that the commercial area would be much better for a restaurant. Someone else agreeing that the restaurant feature is nice, but the proposal for Profish offers more than just typical retail, including experiential opportunities with residents, particularly with young kids, that is walkable. This is much more than what can be offered at the current North College Park Commercial District. I don't think we get the things that North College Park is missing with just populating the current commercial district. The Profish proposal is very unique for this reason. A comment, there is a lot of new residential directly across the train tracks that can count for density for the Stone property. And it seems like the traffic studies and this meeting is pushing more for a residential development instead of industrial. The fact that a large semi would not be able to even make that U-turn on Rhode Island and Blackfoot.
Yeah, I mean, just quickly, I don't think we're trying to pick one or the other. We were just trying to identify the issues. And there are issues with the truck movement with some of the residential streets. And yeah, I mean, that's just kind of the current situation. But yeah, I mean, I just want to clarify that we're not trying to pick one or the other or prioritize.
Okay. And I think we addressed this earlier, but what time frame are we talking about? When will decisions be made?
The time frame is not up to us. It's up to the property owner to pursue a rezoning of the property if residential is the desired goal, or to pursue industrial, excuse me. And as we mentioned, there appear to be a couple of industrial offers on the table right now. But again, it's not up to the city or the county. It would be a private sector decision. So I can't speak to time frame.
Okay. A question about if the city had its 5-year plan, but the county won't do the master plan, does that delay or stop the city's 5-year plan?
No, I don't believe so. The city's going to pursue its vision, its goals, and it would be helpful to have the citywide comprehensive analysis that a master plan affords. But I think we will move forward without it.
Okay, we have a question just about, I guess, the purpose of this meeting. Why are we here tonight, since there is no specific proposal on the table from the owner to the city or county?
So again, I think there were, because these two different proposals had been out in the public, there may have been some confusion about the status of the proposal. So that was one reason to convene a meeting like this. The other, as I mentioned earlier, is just to start thinking about this site, understanding its opportunities and constraints, and then thinking about what is a reasonable future of this property in the future. Now, it could be in the short term. It doesn't matter, because we said repeatedly, it's in the private sector. It's currently on the market for sale, and there could be a deal made tomorrow that would make this conversation moot. But I still think for the long term of this property and of the entire Branchville Industrial District, it's an important question for the city to ask its residents and to ask itself about what is the most appropriate vision going forward for the property. So this is a planning conversation, and I'll just add that we really appreciate all these comments. It's an unusual situation. I would say that you have such a large industrial area in such close proximity to single-family homes and residential streets. Typically in planning, you want to separate uses. You want to keep the industrial as far away from your single-family homes as possible. And you're typically not allowed to access industrial through a residential street. So these are longstanding planning issues, but this property existed for a long time as it was a manufacturing use, but it didn't create a huge impact on the community. So I think there was good coexistence there. Going into the future, it's just a little bit of the unknown for us. So I hope you've appreciated the information tonight, and we'll think more about this going forward.
We have just a few more questions and comments. So about the zoning, this question is, can the city offer the owner a different zoning option, or does the city just have to wait for the owner to request a change?
Well, this is really a Chad or Scott question, but I'll just say right up front that the city does not have zoning authority, so it will never be up to the city to offer that to an owner. And any kind of a zoning change would need to be at the request of the property owner.
Okay, we have a question about how much was the traffic analysis and why are we not doing that prior to the Guild School and Branchville crossing?
How much was the, how much did we pay for our consultants tonight?
I think
Is
so.
that the question? So it was under $5,000. I can say it, it's public information. In terms of the traffic analysis for the Children's Guild and for Branchville Crossing, two different things. One's a daycare, one's an apartment building. There were traffic impact analyses, complete traffic analyses prepared for both of those projects as required. And they're in the public record.
Okay, and then we just have a comment with a safety concern by Rhode Island Avenue and Greenbelt Road. As we have the attic towers and soon coming Section 8 housing, an apartment building in front of the Branchville Fire Department means we are going to have an increased amount of people, especially seniors, crossing the street, especially in front of attic towers. So they're just concerned about cars speeding and seniors almost getting hit by cars.
So what I will say, first of all, there is not Section 8 housing going in at on Branchville Crossing. It will be affordable housing, but not Section 8 housing. So I think that might be a misconception I'd like to just clear up. And sure, that will bring additional pedestrians, I think, to that intersection. And the city is working currently on improving bicycle access through that intersection. And just south of there, also pedestrian improvements. So in fact, tomorrow night at the city council meeting will be a presentation on the Rhode Island Avenue buffered bike lane proposal, which will benefit the area that was mentioned here.
Okay, I think we're pretty much at the end of the questions, other than how can people access the responses and recording of this presentation?
So I believe we will be posting this on the city's website, so we will make it available to all.
Okay. And someone that had joined late was looking for a short summary. Would we just direct them to watch the recording?
I'm sorry, Katie, was that a question for me?
Yes, for someone that had joined late and missed the presentation part, we would just direct them to watch the recording.
Yes, I think that would be most appropriate. But we'll also be documenting the questions and the responses that were made tonight. It may take us a little while to do that because we had so many questions and comments, but that is something that we have committed to do, is to transcribe this so we can preserve these comments we heard tonight.
So that was all the questions that I see.
Okay, then I think we'll send it back to the mayor and Mr. Denoga.
I'll just say thank you to our staff, to Ms. Shum, Ms. Hart, for answering all the questions, all the great information. Also, thank you to Mr. Rowe, Mr. Williams from Park and Planning Commission, as well as traffic consultants, Ms. Martin and Mr. Inamdar. Great information. Also want to thank Councilor Denoga. I'll let him have the last word though. And thank everybody who attended this evening. I think I hope everyone can appreciate that we have some difficult issues. We're trying to figure out how to look at the site in a way that will hopefully bring something positive to our community, but at minimum not bring anything negative to our community. And the traffic challenges, the challenges that are posed by development can be significant. So we wanted to bring everybody together this evening to give an update about what's going on, what those challenges are, and this is part of an ongoing conversation. This is certainly not the end of it. We'll keep you all posted as as we hear more from the developer, from the owner of the property, from whatever developers that might purchase it. We hope that you will continue to stay engaged so that you can keep finding out what's going on with it and bring us any questions or ideas that you have. Councilmember Denoga, would you like to?
I
the
think you
last
got
word?
the last word by covering everything. Very good job. You thanked everyone who needed to be thanked, but I'll just say thanks to you and the city officials, staff, thanks to the consultants, and most especially thanks to the public for coming out to listen and learn about the process and the issues. And I think we all have the goal of coming up with a development of this property that works for the residents of the area, works for the city. And between the city and my office, please stay tuned. You will be offered the opportunity to be engaged in whatever comes. And I do want to take a moment to point out and thank my Chief of Staff, Michelle Garcia. That's her there. Wave, Michelle. She will help keep me on the straight and narrow and keep you informed. So once again, thanks to everyone, and it's tip-off time.
Yes.
All right. Thank you, everyone. Have a good night.
Thank you. Good night.
Right, thank you.